A rotary cutter. This is a tool that a lot of people seem to have a lot of trouble using. The first thing to bear in mind with a rotary cutter is that it really does matter which way round you hold it. This is an ergonomic model from Alpha, and if you want the blade on the other side of the unit, you actually have to disassemble this part and take it apart. A lot of models just have the blade coming straight out the end, in which case you can just hold it a different way up. But whatever you do, you need the blade on the near side of the cutter to you. I'm left-handed, so for me that means the blade is on the right-hand side of the cutter, and I'll cut like this. If I were right-handed, the blade would need to be on the left side of the cutter, so as I made the cut, the blade was still on the near side of the cutter to me. So in case you do have a model like this, and you need to change the direction, lock it, so you can, and then reassemble them on the other side of the cutter. And there you have it, it's in right-handed mode. So if I were right-handed, I would now be able to use the cutter correctly. I'm not, so I'm going to swap it back. A lot of people have trouble using a rotary cutter, and so far as I can tell, if we just draw a line here on the paper so we can see where the cut goes compared to the ruler. If you hold the rotary cutter parallel with the ruler and run it along like this, then it is actually very easy for you to find yourself wandering away from the ruler. So if we make a cut, then I don't know if you can see that easily. There are parts where the blade has touched against the line, parts where there's actually quite a lot of white above the pencil line. And that is a typical problem people seem to have with the rotary cutter. In fact, what you'll probably find is when you use a knife to cut against a ruler, you don't actually hold the blade of the knife completely parallel to the edge of the ruler, and if you did, you'd have the same problem. You actually hold the blade of the knife slightly towards the ruler, so that there is almost a scissor action between the edge of the blade and the edge of the ruler. And you want to try and set exactly the same thing up with your rotary cutter. So we'll draw another line so you can see exactly how accurate we get it. You're trying to position your cutter so that this face of the blade here, not the actual sharp part here, but this face of the blade here, is rubbing against the side of the ruler as you draw it along. And you should always be able to hear it as you cut. And the easiest way to do that is place it parallel and then just tilt it ever so slightly in this direction. Now you really only need a fraction of a degree here. We're not talking about a massive tilt, and you really want to avoid a massive tilt because then you've got the chance of the cutter rolling up the side of the ruler and cutting your fingers, which is bad. So just a fraction of a degree towards the ruler so that you can hear that metal against metal slicing as you make the cut. And don't be afraid to make more than one light cut to properly separate the card. I still need to make another pass here. And we should find now that there is no discrepancy between the edge of the pencil and the edge of the paper. And once you have practiced with a rotary cutter, it gives you a much nicer cut than a knife ever will. And the reason is, when you make a cut with a knife, you are always dragging the blade through the paper. And often the first sign that you have that your knife is getting a bit blunt is when you're cutting on something laminated. So you've got your bit of cardstock and then your linen paper on top of it because you're making a homemade card. The first sign you get that your knife is blunt is that it starts to pull at the paper or the label and tear at it. And that's obviously something you want to avoid, especially when you're cutting homemade cards, because that will mark one particular card. With a rotary cutter, on the other hand, all the while that you cut, this disc is rotating around. And that means that at the very edge of the cut, it is always slicing straight down. And it will never tear the thing that it's cutting through, because it's never dragging through the thing it's cutting through. The blade itself is always pushing down, down, down into the paper. So you always get a very clean cut with a rotary cutter. When you're cutting with a rotary cutter, it's even more important than with a knife to make sure your fingers are not over the edge. If you have a knife cut and you've got a finger over the edge of your ruler, then you'll notice, because the knife blade, the body of the knife itself will most likely hit your finger before the blade itself does. And if the blade does hit it, it's just going to hit just at the edge there, and then it won't be able to go any further, because the side of the blade will hit your finger, and you'll notice and you'll stop the cut. The problem with a rotary cutter is, because it acts as a wheel, because that blade is constantly turning around, if you do put your finger there, it's very easy for it to roll up and over the top of your finger and cut all the way across the top. And because this blade is quite sharp, because you don't want to be working with a blunt blade, it will do a lot of damage as it goes over there. So be very careful to keep your fingers back from the edge of the blade. That is the most important rule with a rotary cutter. Always check your fingers are not in the way. And this is also the reason you don't want to tilt the blade too far, because if you tilt it too far, if you're tilting it more than a fraction of a degree towards the ruler, then there's a chance that it will ride up onto the ruler, and then your fingers aren't safe wherever they are. Be careful with it, and it is the best tool for cutting bits of card, especially once they've been printed. But be careful with it, because it can be much more dangerous than a knife.